Let's take a look at creating an RDS on AWS. If you're not familiar with RDS, this is a relational database service that AWS will host for you, and it's pretty much just a database on the cloud. So from your console, your home page, just search RDS, Manage Relational Database Service. We'll select it. You'll click right here where it says DB instances, which is database instances. I already have one database running, but we're going to create a new one. So we click Create Database. And we're going to use the standard create for our creation method. And I will be using MySQL. We're going to leave everything here, default. When you get to templates, it gives you three options: production, dev test, free. I'm going to do the free tier. All right, if you click on the link, it gives you more information about the free tier. You just have to make sure you're within those parameters for the free tier, so make sure to check that out. Availability duration, let's see, settings. This is going to be the name, the identifier. I'm just going to leave that as the default. Credential settings. So master username, I'm going to leave this as admin for this demo. I recommend you change that to something else. And we're going to use self-managed. It's already selected. This will allow us to create a password here. Cool. And again, for the demo, I'm going to use something simple. I'm just going to put password. The only requirement for this password is 8 characters, but I strongly recommend use a complex password. Let's see the configuration. We'll let that go. Storage, the same thing. We'll leave it as default. Now connectivity. This is the next important part. We're going to scroll down. And one of the things we need to make sure that is changed is public access. Right now, the default is no, right? So there is no public IP address that will be associated, and only AWS EC2 instances will be able to access it from within your VPC. That means if you're going to try and build locally, you're going to try and connect with MySQL Workbench or do a Spring Boot application and use this as a database, you won't be able to do that unless this is checked yes. So let's select that. And we'll scroll down. Another thing we'll talk about is security groups, but we'll take a look at that afterwards, after the database is created. And everything else we can leave as default, right? So right here, it shows you the estimated monthly cost. Make sure to look at the pricing guide and make sure that you are going to fall within the free tier. Another recommendation will be just to turn it off when you're not using it. And I can show you how to do that after we create it. Hit Create Database. You might get this pop-up. This is just add-ons that they're trying to recommend. We're going to ignore this for now. And you can see right here, creating database. Now you see the database identifier. We put database 1 in a status of creating. Let's go ahead and click on this. Here it says creating. If you scroll down, there is no endpoint. Port hasn't been assigned. We just saw the availability zone just got updated. So we'll check back in a few minutes once this is created. All right, so it took about 5 minutes. And it says successfully created database. The status has changed to backing up, which is fine. Let's take a look at the things we need. So we're going to need this endpoint, and we'll click the copy button for now. The port 303006, right? We have an availability zone and mentions our VPC, which is the default one. Right here, you can see your security groups, which we're going to talk about right now. And if it's publicly accessible, and it says yes. So this is one of the 2 things needed to access it locally. The second thing is going to be a security group. If we click on this default security group, let's click on that, and you can see inbound rules. There's an inbound rule for all traffic, and it must be coming in through our VPC. So even though we said it's publicly accessible, this security group rule will not allow this inbound traffic in unless it comes from a VPC. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new security rule that will be used for our MySQL database. You can use whichever database you're going to use. And this is going to allow us to access the database, the RDS, through a local build. And we'll connect it with the MySQL Workbench afterwards. And we'll even connect it with the Spring Boot application afterwards. So let's get started on that. All right, so from the home page or any page, we're going to search for security groups. You'll see it says EC2 feature, security groups, so select that one. I already have the MySQL access, but I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new security group. We'll click on the button, and it takes us to the outbound rules. Initially, we're going to leave the outbound rules as default. Let's scroll back up. What we're going to be changing is the inbound rules. Currently, for the server, for the RDS, the inbound rules are set to only allow VPC traffic going in. So we're going to want to just create public access for everyone. Let's add a name. Add a description. And scroll down to add rule for the inbound rule. Now under this type section, we can scroll down and we will see MySQL. Right, if you're using Postgres or a different type of database, that option should be in there. But when we click this MySQL, you can now see that the port is already added. So we go to source, we're just going to say anywhere, IPv4. Now, you can also change this to your own local device's IP address. This is only for demo and testing purposes, right? Just for some local builds. I don't recommend this for production at all. I don't recommend to keep it like this for a while, or if you're using any kind of important or sensitive data. This is just to show the general how to access your server. So make sure to put stronger security group rules before you start putting any real data, before you start pushing this into production. It even pops this up right here, right? It says allows all IP addresses to access your instance, right? It's not recommended. Let's hit create security group. And it's been created. So we're back at our RDS, right? So we can see we do have public accessibility as yes, VPC security groups, right? It's on the default, but we're going to want to add that new MySQL access. So we're going to go to modify. We're going to scroll down and you'll see groups, right? So let's add a new group. We're going to add that new group we created, MySQL access. And then we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom and hit continue. Now it's going to say schedule modification. Right? Do you want to do it during your next scheduled maintenance? No, we're going to apply this right now. And then hit modify database. If we go back into that database, it doesn't need to do any kind of reset, right? It's just modifying the security group that protects it. So it should be available and it should be ready to go. So we're going to need our endpoint, our port, and we already created a username and password. So let's go to the MySQL Workbench and see if we can access this. All right, so I'm in my MySQL Workbench. Let's go ahead and hit the plus symbol to connect. This is just going to be my RDS for the name in the host. I'm going to paste in that endpoint. And the port's already what I want it to be, 3306. If you remember, for my username, it was admin. And my password was password. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit test connection. And perfect. We are successfully connected to it. So we'll say OK and save it. Double click on this new box that popped up. And we are connected to our cloud database on AWS. We can now start adding schemas and databases to this and use it. Next, we'll connect a Spring Boot application to this RDS. So I'll be using Intellij to create this. I'm just going to say RDS demo, Maven, next, Spring Web. And there's going to be two dependencies we're going to need to connect to a database. One of them right here is going to be Spring Data, JPA. And the next one will be our MySQL driver. Let's hit connect. Create. Let's hit create. All right, so after a minute or so, it looks good, ready to go. What we're going to do first is we're just going to try and build it and see what happens. All right, so we get a build failure, and this is because it's looking for that database access. Right, database source. We got to configure the database source. We're going to do that in our source main Java resources application properties. So in our applications.properties, we're going to add some information related to the data source for the database. I have a template here. I'm going to paste this in, and I'll put this template in the comments so that you can have easy access to it. First one is the URL. This is the endpoint. So let's go back to our RDS. Just like we did with the MySQL Workbench, we need the endpoint and the port. We're going to copy the endpoint instead of localhost. And the port's going to come through the MySQL. And we're going to leave the JDBC here as well. At the end of this, you can see this says test Spring Boot, and this is actually the schema that you want to connect to. I've created a RDS demo schema in my database. Username. So I have my username as admin, and my password was password. And then this is the driver, right? This is my MySQL JDBC driver. If you're using a different database, then you'll need the appropriate driver for that. Well, let's save this, run it, and looks good, right? So it started successfully. So now our Spring Boot application is connected to that cloud database, that RWS. All right, so we've completed creating a RWS instance. We've updated the security permissions, made sure it was publicly accessible. We connected to a MySQL Workbench, and we even connected it to a Spring Boot application. So if this video provided you any value, if it was helpful for you for creating an RDS, please give me a like, give me a follow, a subscribe, and follow along for more videos.